There are questions that arrive quietly. They don't usually show up when life is easy. They arrive when something has broken or ended or gone still. They arrive in the car on the way home. They arrive when you're washing dishes, walking, sitting up late with the lights low. And they don't ask to be solved right away. They ask to be heard. Questions like, why do I keep becoming the same person in different relationships? Why does understanding my patterns not seem to change them? Why does one part of me long for peace while another part keeps reaching for the old wound? And what is healing supposed to be really? I think most of us meet those questions eventually. Carl Jung certainly did. Welcome back to Seekers of Grace. I'm MagicalMara, and I'm really glad you're here. Today, we are going to spend some time with one of the most fascinating thinkers of the last century. Not because he had all the answers, but because he was willing to sit with the questions that most people prefer to avoid. We're talking about Carl Jung, yes, but we are also talking about something larger than Carl Jung. We're talking about the strange possibility, and I mean this, that healing is not only about insight, it's about wholeness. And wholeness, as Jung came to understand it, has a spiritual dimension. So, let us begin there, gently and not with theory. One of the most common assumptions in modern life is this. If you understand something well enough, it will change. We understand our childhood, we understand our attachment style, we understand our triggers, we understand why we overreact, why we shut down, why we chase, why we hide. We understand why we repeat the same old pattern, even while promising ourselves that we will never do it again. And yet, understanding and transformation are not always the same thing. Jung noticed this again and again in the consulting room. People could speak beautifully about their pain. They could trace every thread back to its source. They could name the wound, explain the wound, analyze the wound, and still find themselves living from it. That did not make the work useless, far from it. Jung valued insight deeply, he really did. But over time, as the decades went by, he became convinced that something else was also needed, something deeper than interpretation, something that touched the whole person. That search began with Freud. Jung admired Freud enormously. In the early years, Freud showed that the human mind is not transparent to itself. He revealed, and that was revolutionary, how much of our life is shaped by unconscious forces, hidden desires, buried fears, old memory. Jung never dismissed that. But as his work deepened, he began to feel that Freud's map of the psyche was too narrow, too small. See, Freud had a powerful explanation for religion. It was illusion, wish fulfillment, a psychological defense against helplessness and death. And Jung listened carefully to that. He did. But he couldn't stop noticing something that Freud's model didn't explain very well. Sometimes people encountered something in their suffering that felt larger than their personal history. Sometimes a dream arrived with astonishing force, sometimes a symbol. Sometimes a person was changed not by analysis alone, but by contact with a presence they could not fully describe. And Jung didn't rush to call that God, not at first. He didn't begin with theology. He began with observation and just kept watching. And what he noticed was that the psyche is not only a private mechanism. It's not just drives and memories. It's also a living system that reaches towards wholeness. That idea changed his life. And it changed the psychology too. Because if there is something in us that reaches towards wholeness, then healing is not just about fixing damage. It's about participating in a process that's already moving. It's about learning to recognize the movement rather than forcing it. And that changes everything. To speak about Jung properly, you have to speak about identity. Who did you become in order to survive? What did you learn to show? What did you learn to hide? What version of yourself learned to receive love or avoid punishment or keep the peace? The ego, in Jung's language, is the center of our conscious identity. It's the part that says, this is who I am. It's the narrator. It keeps the calendar, remembers the name, chooses the words, tries to keep life organized. In Vortex Healing, we have this term, functional ego. So it will be that part of me that if I'm walking down the street and someone says, Mara is a twat, I will turn around and see who said that. The ego is not your enemy. It's necessary. Without it, we couldn't function at all. But the ego is not the whole person. Jung came to believe that there is another center, one much deeper, more mysterious, and he called it the self. The self is not your personality. It's not your resume, your mood, your habits, your opinions, or the story you tell about your life at the dinner table. It's the pattern of wholeness that contains all of that. It's the part of the psyche that seems to know, even when the ego doesn't, what the next moment towards life might be. That idea can feel strange at first, because the ego prefers to imagine that it is in charge. It likes certainty. It likes plans. It likes a map with a clear route and a predictable destination. And then life interrupts, sometimes gently, sometimes not gently at all. A relationship ends, a body breaks down, a career collapses, a grief arrives that you didn't choose. Something in you discovers, often reluctantly, that the ego was never as sovereign as it liked to believe. That can feel humiliating, but it can also be the beginning of real freedom. Jung noticed that many people begin to heal the moment they stop trying to dominate the process, which doesn't mean they become passive or because they give up, but because they finally realize that life is larger than the part of them that tries so hard to control it. That surrender is not weakness. It's often the first honest contact with something wiser than fear. If you ever felt yourself soften after exhausting every other strategy, you know what I mean. You stop wrestling with the same locked door. You stop demanding an instant answer. And in that space, something begins to move. And that didn't happen because you forced it, but because you made room for it. That is close to what Jung meant by the self. It's the quiet center that keeps orienting you back towards life. Not perfection, life, wholeness, integration, and honesty. And the more Jung watched, the more he became convinced that the ego's job is not to be the king. Its job is to cooperate, to listen, to make room, to let a larger pattern unfold. One of the hardest things to accept about ourselves is that we're not only made of the qualities we proudly display, we are also made of the parts we disown. Jung called that hidden territory the shadow. Now, the shadow is often misunderstood. People hear the word and imagine something dark, terrible, even evil. That's not quite it. So let me ask you, what quality do you hate the most in other people? What drives you crazy when you see it? Is it someone's arrogance, someone's neediness, someone's recklessness, someone's coldness? Notice what comes up for you. Jung would say, pay attention to that, because the thing that triggers you most is often the thing you have exiled in yourself. The shadow is not simply the bad part of you. It's the part of you that got left behind when you learned how to be acceptable. Think about how early this begins. A child is loud, then told to be quiet. A child is angry, then told to be nice. A child is tender, then shamed for being too sensitive. A child is ambitious, then told not to show off. A child is joyful, then learns that joy can make other people uncomfortable. Bit by bit, we adapt. We do what children do best. We read the room around us and make ourselves fit in. At first, those adaptations are protective. very often brilliant. They help us stay connected. They help us survive the climate we were given. But over time, parts of us can get pushed down into the basement, not because they're worthless, but because they're inconvenient. And here is the thing about the shadow. It doesn't disappear. It lives. It shapes your life in ways you don't see. This is why you can be consciously trying to be humble, but also attract people who exploit your humility. Your power is in the shadow, unavailable to you. This is why you can be consciously trying to be kind and feel explosive anger arising. Your rage is exiled. This is why you can intellectually know you're worthy and feel shame in your bones. Your worth is in the shadow. And here is what changes everything. The divine is also in the shadow. And here is what I want to offer to you in this moment. Because understanding the shadow intellectually and actually seeing your shadow, those are two very different things. A few months ago, I've developed a tool called the Shadow Mirror. It's an AI-powered soul audit that helps you identify the wounds and exiled parts of you that you might not be conscious yet. You type how you will talk to yourself, completely unfiltered, and it shows you the patterns you might have missed. It's not therapy, and it's not meant to replace your own inner work, but it can be a starting point, a way to see what's actually living in your basement before you invite it home. It will show you things your therapist might have not figured out yet, not because they're not skilled, but because the shadow mirror offers different lens, a different angle into your psyche. You can try it for free. The link is in the show notes. I created it because I kept seeing people understand their shadow in theory, but still feel stuck in practice. This is meant to bridge that gap. So, back to the divine is also in the shadow. What I mean by it, God is not only in your light. God is also in the parts that you rejected. The divine didn't reject your power. You did, my friend. The divine didn't reject your sexuality. You did. The divine didn't reject your rage or your worthiness or your whatever. You did. So shadow work is not just a psychological cleanup. It's a spiritual recovery. It's bringing the exiled part of yourself home. It's recognizing that every part of yourself that you have deemed unacceptable is still divine, still worthy, still parts of God's creation. Jung worked with the shadow through active imagination. And this is important. This is not meditation and is not visualization. Active imagination is a conscious dialogue with the unconscious while remaining fully awake. So, when something triggers you, when you notice a reaction that doesn't quite make sense, instead of running for the hills or analyzing it, you stay with it. You sit with the feeling. You give it space to speak. You ask, what are you trying to tell me? What do you need? What part of me are you showing me that I have rejected? And here is what you discover. The shadow isn't trying to destroy you. Usually it's trying to protect you or trying to express a legitimate need that your conscious identity decided was unacceptable. I knew a woman whose parents punished her for her ambition. She developed a shadow around power. She made herself small, unconsciously sabotaging success. But that shadow, that exiled ambition, it wasn't evil. It was trying to protect her from further punishment. It was also trying to say, your power is divine. Your ambition is sacred. Come home to yourself. The grace here is radical. You don't have to transcend the shadow. You integrate it. You don't have to become enlightened by being more pure, more spiritual, more good. You have to become whole by accepting yourself, by saying, yes, I have rage. Yes, I have hunger. Yes, I have power. All of it is sacred. When a person begins to do that, something softens. The inner world loses some of its fuel, and you stop needing so many masks. Once Jung had lived with the shadow idea for long enough, he began to notice another strange thing. Life seemed to answer back. in the way an ordinary moment can suddenly feel loaded with meaning. You think of someone and they call. You open a book and you find a sentence you needed. You have a question inside you and the answer arrives from a place you were not expecting. You meet a person at exactly the right moment. You hear a phrase walking on the street and it lands like it was aimed directly at your life. Jung called this synchronicity and a casual connecting principle, meaningful coincidence. Now, he didn't mean that everything is a sign. Every leaf is a message. Jung was too careful for doing that. He knew people can become obsessed with pattern making, and he knew the mind can project meaning all over the place when it's hungry for certainty. That wasn't his point. His point was narrower, a bit more mysterious, if you wish. Sometimes inner and outer events seem to move together in a way that cannot be explained by cause and effect alone. Sometimes a dream and a waking event answer each other. Sometimes an inner state and an outer circumstance arrive in the same hour, as if reality itself has briefly becomes more porous. There is a story, a famous one. A patient dreamed of receiving a golden scarab, a beetle. While she was speaking about the dream, Jung heard something tap on the window. He opened it and found a beetle, close enough to the scarab image to make the moment startling for his patient. He handed it to her, and the effect was very powerful. Something in her finally loosened. Something in her belief system has cracked open. Her mind could no longer stay sealed into its old certainty. What I love about the story is not that it proves anything. It doesn't need to prove anything. What matters is the experience of being interrupted by meaning, being interrupted by the possibility that life is not dead matter moving blindly through space, being interrupted by the possibility that the psyche and the world are somehow in conversation. I know how easy it is to trivialize the kind of things. We do it all the time. We reduce every strange moment to coincidence and just move on. Sometimes we are right to do that. Not every pattern is sacred, and please do not be delusional about it. But sometimes dismissal comes too quickly. Sometimes we are eager to explain that we miss the experience itself. Jung invited a different posture. Stay with it. Notice it. Do not rush past the moment just because it doesn't fit your old framework. Life might be whispering to you, not commanding, whispering. That's when reason synchronicity matters in spiritual life. It teaches attention. It trains the ear. It makes you less arrogant about your own little map of reality. And once you start noticing, everything changes. The world isn't just happening to you anymore. You are in it. It's alive. You are in conversation with it. And when that happens, the question changes. Not, what can I control? But, what is life asking of me now? All of these leads to the center of Jung's later thought, the self. Now, at first, the self can sound like another psychological term among many, another concept to add to your collection. But in Jung's mature work, it becomes something much more intimate than a concept, something alive. You know, the part of you that keeps calling you back when you drift too far from yourself, when you lose yourself in someone else's idea of who you should be, when you become so small you can barely recognize yourself. There is something that doesn't like that, something that keeps saying, not this direction, come back, come home. That's the self. If the ego says, I must manage my life, the self says, there is something deeper unfolding here. If the ego says, I must be acceptable, then the self says, become true. If the ego says, I must never fall apart, the self says, sometimes falling apart is the beginning of integration. I think that's why so many people feel both comforted and threatened by Jung. He doesn't promise that lives become neat. He doesn't promise that awakening will make you permanently calm and polished and in control. He promises something more honest than that. He promises the possibility of becoming whole. And whole people still grieve, they still get afraid, they still lose sleep, they still have awkward days and disappointing relationships and moments when old pain returns. But something changes in the way they meet those things. They become less split, less at war with themselves, less committed to the image of who they thought they had to be. Jung called the process of becoming whole individuation. It's a beautiful word, but the experience is usually less glamorous than the word made it sound. It's the slow surrender of a false identity. It's the willingness to be less performative and more real. It's the long, imperfect, often inconvenient movement towards the person you were before fear taught you to edit yourself. And it usually begins in crisis. Not always, but it often does. A loss, a breakdown, bodily illness, a divorce, a disillusionment, a sudden exhaustion that no amount of success can cover up. Something in life says, what you have built is not enough anymore. Not because it was meaningless, but because it was never meant to be the whole house. That can be frightening, and it can also be the beginning of sanity. Jung knew this from his own life as well as from his patients. He wasn't writing from a comfortable distance. He was living through it. And as the decades went by, he became to believe that the deepest movements of the psyche are not random at all. They're oriented and they're trying to bring the person into greater unity. That doesn't mean that every painful thing is good. I will not say that. It means that pain is not the end of the story. It means the story can still be held inside a larger movement towards life. The larger movement is what Jung called the self. And some people, speaking more simply, might name it God. Jung's relationship with God is one of the reasons his work still unsettles people. Some want him to be a saint, some want him to be a scientist, some want him to be neatly secular. None of these boxes really hold him. He was careful with his words. He didn't pretend he was a theologian, and he wasn't trying to describe psychological reality. But he also refused to reduce spiritual experience to mere fantasy. He believed that there is something in the human being that reaches towards the sacred, and that when people encounter it honestly, they're changed. That's why he could say things that sound astonishing even now, because he has spent a lifetime listening to the kinds of experiences that do not fit politely into a materialist frame. In these years after his break with Freud, Jung entered a period of profound inner disturbance. He felt alone, he felt unmoored, he began to encounter visions, symbols, images, figures from the depths of his psyche. Rather than dismissing them, he turned towards them. He wrote them down, he painted them, he stayed in conversation with them. That process became the Red Book. I think it matters that he did not run away. He didn't pretend the unconscious has nothing to say. Didn't try to stay respectable by ignoring the very material that was transforming him. He went through the fire of his own psyche with seriousness. That's part of why his work still has weight. He wasn't theorizing from a safe balcony. He was deep inside the storm himself. The Red Book shows a man wrestling with his own depths until a new center begins to form. Philomene appears, shadows figures appear, symbols of death, rebirth, union, and transformation appear. Jung later read these experiences through the lens of alchemy. He saw the old language of transforming as a mirror for psychic change. The blackening, the dissolving, the separating, the joining. Those stages are not only chemical metaphors, they are also interior experiences. And here is the point where Jung becomes most provocative of all. He's suggesting that the divine isn't only something we are reaching for. It's not just up there. It emerges. It actually becomes conscious through you, through the process of becoming yourself. And not like, look at me, and I'm enlightened. It's the opposite of that. It's humbling. The more real you become, the more you disappear into something much larger. The more honestly you become yourself, the less separate you feel from something much larger. As if the more honestly a person becomes themselves, the more transparent they become to a reality larger than the ego. But I think Jung's genius was that he didn't wake up one day and said it. He said it after a lifetime of watching the human psyche move in ways he could not reduce. He said it because he had seen too much to keep pretending the soul was just an empty machine. So when Jung speaks of God, I hear caution and wonder together. I hear a man trying to remain faithful to experience. I hear something saying there is something in us that is not exhausted by the ego. And if that's true, then the journey home is not a fantasy. It's the most serious thing we can do. If all of this sounds lofty, let me bring it back down to earth. Because Jung was not only interested in rare inner experiences, he was interested in what changes a human life. He spent time with people who had suffered, people who had been trapped in repetition, people who had reached the end of old strategies. And again, he found that the turning point was not simply intellectual mastery. It was relation to the unconscious, relation to the shadow, relation to the self, relation to the deeper movement of life. So, what does that mean for us here and now? First, pay attention to what triggers you. Not to fix it immediately, not to shame yourself for it. Just listen. What is this reaction trying to protect? What did I not want to feel? What part of me have been waiting to be acknowledged? Second, begin to notice your inner life without turning it into a project of control. Dream matters, silence matters, repeated patterns matters. Those moments when life seems to answer a question that you didn't even say out aloud, they matter too. Do not force meaning into everything, but do not become numb either. Third, stop confusing healing with perfection. Healing is not the same as becoming untouchable. It's not the same as becoming polished, calm, or beyond conflict. Healing is much deeper than that. It's the gradual loss of the false self-grip. It's the return to what was exiled. It's the courage to tell the truth about where you hurt, where you hide, where you long, where you resist. Fourth, remember that grace is often quiet, not dramatic, quiet. It may arrive as the strength to apologize, as the ability to rest, as the moment of honesty you have been avoiding, as the beginning of grief that finally wants to move, as the relief of not having to perform anymore. And if you're being called to work at this depth, do not treat that call lightly. Jung would have not treated it lightly, neither would I. If something in you is asking for a small, sacred, contained space where psychology, presence, and genuine inner work can meet, honor that movement. That may be the next faithful step. Some people need therapy, some need solitude, some need prayer, some need a notebook and a long walk, some need to be held by community while they begin to tell the truth. And some need all of that at different times. There is no single path. There is only the path that is becoming real for you. So, where does all of this leave us? It leaves us with a quieter kind of hope. Not the hope that everything will be easy, not the hope that pain will disappear on command, hope that something in you is not finished with you. You are not only the story of what happened to you. You are not only the habits that formed around the pain. You are not only the mask that have learned how to survive. There is a deeper center in you, and it has been moving towards wholeness the whole time. Jung called it the self. Some will call it God. Some will call it grace. Whatever the language you use, the invitation is the same. Stop fighting everything that is trying to make you whole. Stop asking only what is wrong with me, but start asking what is trying to become conscious in you. Start asking where your life might already be guiding you. I think that's the real grace here. Not that we become perfect, but that we are accompanied, even in a breakdown, even in the confusion, even when the old self is cracking open and the new one has not yet arrived, especially then. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for sitting with these ideas and with your own life a little more closely. If something in this conversation stayed with you, do not rush past it. Let it breathe. Take it for a walk. Write it down. Speak it out aloud. See what remains after the words settle. This is Seekers of Grace, and I'm MagicalMara. See you again soon. And until then, keep going gently. Keep telling the truth. And keep seeking grace. See you where the light breaks. Until next time, remember, the truth of what you are is that you are love and compassion. Be well, be good, and be love. I love you. Ciao for now.